Mike Brown, the former FEMA director.
Joining us here is the former FEMA director.
History, I think, was very unkind to you, my friend. Very unkind.
Mr. Brown, thanks for being with us.
This is Michael Brown Unplugged.
Hey, good morning, everybody. So and welcome to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. I meant to do this story last week, and it completely slipped my mind. And I found it in my stack of stuff, my POS, my pile of stuff over here. And I had to get back to it because if you want to understand what it's like growing up in Oklahoma, this story sums it up. The source of this story is the Guthrie, Oklahoma Police Department. Guthrie was the original territorial capital of Oklahoma before it was moved south down to Oklahoma City. But here's how the story goes. Guthrie police had quite the surprise when they pulled over a car with an expired tag. I mean, you can just stop right there and make fun of somebody driving along. Can't you just imagine it's some beat up old car and it's missing a couple of hubcaps and maybe a rim or two, and it's just beat up. So they pull over a car that has an expired tag. Well, it turns out the car is stolen, and the cops say they found a canister of radioactive uranium, a rattlesnake, and an open bottle of Kentucky Deluxe whiskey. Now, according to the Guthrie Popo, the officer was patrolling the area of the 300 block of Viking Drive back on June 25 when he noticed a car with an expired tag. The cop pulled over the car and spoke with the driver, later identified as 41-year-old Stephen Jennings. No, it's not me, but you were thinking it was. The cop said Jennings' driver's license was suspended and the car he was driving had been reported stolen. He reportedly told the cops that he had a firearm in the center console and that there was a timber rattlesnake in an aquarium in the back seat. I mean, what's missing? I mean, maybe opioids, right? Bourbon, whiskey. Officers said they searched the car and found a gun and an almost full open bottle of Kentucky Deluxe whiskey. Jennings and his passenger were placed in police custody. A silver canister containing a yellow powdery substance was also found inside the car. The canister advised that the yellow in color powdery substance was uranium, according to the police report. Crews with the Emergency Management Institute responded and verified that the substance was indeed radioactive material. Police said they took possession of the substance for safekeeping. What? Jennings has been charged with felony count of a possession of a stolen vehicle, misdemeanor counts of transporting an open container of liquor, not uranium, operating a motor vehicle with a suspended driver's license, and failure to carry security verification form. His passenger, Rachel Rivera, is charged with possession of a firearm after a former felony conviction. Just another dragging Main Street, right? Hey, let's go see what everybody else is doing. You're a teenager. Let's go see what everybody else is doing. Okay, let me get the whiskey, the uranium, and the gun. Now we can go. I spent a lot of time yesterday talking about immigration. Well, today, and I mentioned in yesterday's podcast that I thought it was time that Congress do something about the asylum laws. Well, the Department of Justice has announced a new immigration rule that's going to restrict illegal immigrants from countries other than those bordering the United States for applying for asylum first in the United States if they have attempted to enter the United States across the southern border after failing to apply for protection in a third country. Here's an example. The rule would not allegedly apply to Mexicans whose first safe country is America. The Attorney General has authorized the change in the rules under the Department of Homeland Security in an effort to curtail this humanitarian crisis at the border and in an attempt to deter those abusing the current law from the dangerous trek that they make coming across all of Mexico to get up here to our border. Now, the rule has very limited exceptions. It's going to go into effect 30 days from yesterday. It will not apply to those potential immigrants who have already applied for asylum. But in Monday's decision, in yesterday's decision, the Attorney General said this: the rules bar on asylum eligibility for aliens who fail to apply for protection in at least one third country through which they transit en route to the United States also aims to further the humanitarian purpose of asylum. It prioritizes individuals who are unable to obtain protection from persecution elsewhere and individuals who are victims of a severe form of trafficking in persons as defined by a certain part of the United States Code. He continues that by deterring meritless asylum claims and deprioritizing the applications of individuals who could have obtained protection in another country, the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security seek to ensure that those refugees who have no alternative to U.S.-based asylum relief or who have been subjected to an extreme form of human trafficking are able to obtain relief more quickly. He also says the rule seeks to curtail the human crisis created by human smugglers that are bringing men, women, and in particular children across the southern border. I think this is a good move. Now, I also think that it's going to result almost instantaneously in a lawsuit, and Lord knows where that's going to end up. But the rule intends, the way I read the rule, it intends to aid the United States in its negotiations with all these foreign nations on migration issues. Interestingly, as far as I'm concerned, this rule is fairly similar to most rules in the European Union. Now, I don't always agree with a lot of what the European Union does, but in their effort to try to stem some of the flow of asylum seekers, they've enacted similar rules. So now the test is going to be whether or not this passes constitutional muster. I think that it does, because clearly, under the Immigration Act of 1948, whatever it was, the Congress gave the president, the executive branch, the authority to enforce immigration laws. And like they do in almost every other piece of legislation they pass, they leave the rulemaking authority to implement that law up to the executive branch. So they've finally taken a step. And I think that's good news for the administration. And I think the other thing that it's good for, and look, I was about to say something really stupid, like I hate to politicize immigration. The reason I say that's a stupid thing to say is because immigration is already probably the most politicized topic that's going on in our political debate right now. Power to them, because we need to start drawing these lines of demarcation. It's not that we are opposed to immigration. It's not that we are opposed to asylum seekers, but we have to do something to stem the flow of these people who are just coming unfettered across the border. This is a great first step. I'll have to also see what Christian Total has to say about this, but cultural Marxism, i.e. political correctness, is an absolute wrecking ball. The sole purpose of political correctness is to destroy a culture that has been slated for demolition. Ours. The latest to be reduced to a heap of rubble by the wrecking ball is Agent 007, who's now going to be played by a black woman. Now, this isn't parody. This isn't from The Onion. This isn't from the Babylon Bee. This is real life. But it is self-parody on the part of liberal social engineers. But, even though we might laugh at them, they get satisfaction of knowing that the damage is done. The Daily Mail reports, quote, "Since Daniel Craig announced that he was standing down as James Bond, debate has raged whether the next 007 should be a woman or black. Now the Mail on Sunday can reveal that she will be both, thanks to the intervention of feminist TV writer Phoebe Waller-Bridge. In what's been called a popcorn-dropping moment, British star Lashana Lynch, who will be given Bond's License to Kill in the 25th movie in the franchise, currently being shot in Italy and in the United Kingdom." Now, you and I can understand why these dumbasses would hate 007, a suave, womanizing remnant of a more heroic Britain who defeats the enemies of the West. Think about that. Suave, white male, a hero, defeating enemies of the West. 007 must be brought down. So as with the counter-revolutionary in a country that has already succumbed to communism, it's not enough just to kill him. He has to be humiliated first. So the woman of color 007 is the equivalent of forcing James Bond to confess to outrageous crimes against the people before he's just taken out and shot and thrown into a ditch. But in the movie, James Bond doesn't actually have his sex and race changed. He's retired. and a conspicuously incongruous woman of color takes over as 007. Then Bond is called out of retirement, finds his politically correct replacement sexually irresistible, but is rebuffed by her. Of course, the cultural Marxists are going to love that. Now, let's be honest. I am a absolute James Bond fanatic. I've got the box set over there. I've got them all. But Ian Fleming, the creator, was a cultural Marxist. That's all the more reason to reduce the iconic character he created to some sort of farce in the name of cultural Marxism. So I think we can stand by. I see how the franchise is now going to go. We'll have the transsexual 007, which will follow if the woman of color 007 doesn't kill off the franchise completely. Why can't we just leave well enough alone? Why can't we just enjoy? The other thing, if I'm objecting to 007 being a woman, that probably makes me a sexist. And if I object to 007 being a black woman, that probably makes me a racist, sexist. And I suppose, too, a racist, sexist, misogynist. I just think that James Bond ought to be James Bond, not Jamie Bond. You know, speaking of Britain, when I said that Britain's one of those countries that's already been taken over by communism, here's an example of why I say things like that. Now, it is sinking in more and more into socialism. It's not quite all the way to communism yet, but it might as well be. Ever more jobs are government jobs in the United Kingdom, primarily because of the National Health Service. Well, applicants may have to pass a religious test to hold a government job. The religion in question? Well, of course, it's cultural Marxism. The story is reported in the Telegraph this way. Dr. David McCareth, 56 years old, claims that he was sacked as a disability benefits assessor by the Department of Work and Pensions because of his religious beliefs. The father of four alleges that he was asked in a conversation with a line manager, quote, "If you have a man 6 foot tall with a beard who says that he wants to be addressed as she or Mrs., would you do that?" Now, Dr. Makareth, an evangelist who now works as an emergency doctor in Shropshire, claims that his contract was then terminated because of his refusal to use transgendered pronouns. He argues that he was dismissed, quote, "not because of any realistic concerns over the rights and sensitivities of transgender individuals, but because of my refusal to make an abstract ideological pledge." I love the way he puts that. It wasn't because I wasn't going to respect a bearded white male that wants to be called she or Mrs., but because of his refusal to make an abstract ideological pledge. Now, if he really wanted to, if he really did want his job, he probably could have claimed that he was Muslim. Then his thought crime would have been forgiven because Muslims get this wide latitude in the United Kingdom. But to his credit, he's taken a stand on principle rather than going along to get along. And I think if more people had the guts to do that, not just in Britain, but all across the world where this cultural Marxism and political correctness is taking hold, we would not be forced to assert that 2 + 2 = 5 just to hold a job. We would actually start to have respect that, oh, well, you believe that, I believe this and that are in conflict, so let's figure out a way to work around that. But, I'm just thinking about what I just said. You think this and I think that. Let's figure out a way to work around that. Doesn't that seem reasonable? Or does it seem archaic? I think maybe it seems archaic. I actually think I've used this soundbite before, but in looking up the story about the doctor, I came across this video again. It now has 1.68 million views. And it's really proof that it's all about emotion to liberals. I think I have a good EQ, a good emotional quotient. And I think a good balanced person has a good balance of both emotional quotients and intelligence quotients, IQ and EQ. But I think that liberals, generally speaking, base almost everything they do on feelings to the detriment or to the ignorance or to the repulsion of facts. The feelings are more important than factual reality. So here's a woman that is she's you can't see the video, so let me describe it. And I want to be objective. So here's a woman that is dressed in some sort of scantily clad T-shirt, and she's pasty white, and she has a shaved head. She's talking to two people that are wearing "Make America Great Again" hats. The one guy, David, who's identified as David Harris Jr. in the video, he's not a small guy. He looks to me to be about 6 feet tall, probably a little over 200 pounds, maybe 220 or so. So kind of a stocky guy. And I don't know who's next to him. I don't know whether it's his girlfriend or just a friend or an acquaintance, but there's somebody next to him. And they confront this woman, and she looks at him and says, "I want you to think about your hat and the way your hat makes people feel." I didn't know that hats make people feel. People, I know that there are external factors that can cause people to become emotional. The death of a loved one, the death of a pet, a tragic accident, loss, any number of things, external factors can cause emotions to well up in an individual. But to a certain degree, we choose those emotions too. We can, exercising mind over matter, deal with those emotions in a rational way. We can try to turn the negative into a positive. So here's a woman who walks up to this man. There's some sort of protest or gathering of some sort. And she looks him square in the eye. Now, she's looking up to him because she's much shorter. Think about your hat and the way it makes people feel.
And the way it makes people feel, because it incites fear in all those around us. Every person is afraid of that hat. I am afraid of that hat. Keep America great. For so many people, that's racism.
Yeah, but that's because of the mainstream media's narrative that's painted Donald Trump as a racist. I don't agree with the narrative. I'm out here to try to share that that narrative is skewed.
But as a human being, we should pay attention to fear and not logic.
Wait, you said to pay attention to fear and not logic?
Yes.
I should pay attention to emotions and not facts?
Yes.
Why would I pay attention to emotions when
that are real in this world?
Facts are facts?
Are facts. No, emotions are real. Emotions is one removed from spirit. I find that it is hard to trust others.
You shouldn't trust the mainstream media. You should start listening and
What
looking
media then do you suggest? That is saying don't trust knowledge, operate in darkness.
No, go look up facts. Go look up actual statistics and facts.
Emotion is
research.
Fact. Emotion is real.
But emotions change, don't they?
I love that. But emotions can change, right? Bam. He just handed her his hat. I have to admit, though, I truly, I mean this sincerely, I feel sorry for this woman. If you could see her, she's a pathetic individual, because she really is convinced that emotions are the only real thing in the world. She can't accept that emotions can change. Facts are facts. Now, facts can change. It's cold one day, which is a fact, and it's hot the next day. That's a fact. They're both still facts, but they're not the same fact. One is hot, one is cold. But she wants to live in this world where everything is based upon emotion. And I've always maintained that the reason people do that is because, there are no guardrails. There are no barriers. You just let your emotions go wherever they take you. And so there's no self-control. There's no discipline. And if you live your life that way, and you take it and implement that into public policy, that means that public policy is never going to be based on any sort of economic reality, social reality, legalities, or anything else. It's going to be based solely on emotion. And we see that in the idea of Medicare for all, because none of us want to see somebody just unnecessarily suffer. But that's why we have a social safety net. But from an emotional point of view, we want to take those emotions and just expand it out into public policy, which makes zero economic sense. Zero. Yeah, I really feel sorry for the woman. I ran across this article of things that you should never do, 7 office bathroom sins that you should never commit. And of course, obviously it catches my attention, right? The 7 deadly sins of bathroom etiquette. So I start scrolling through them, and it kind of reminds me of how far we have come or gone in society. So here are the 7 deadly sins I would say in any public restroom, let alone an office. Number 1, talking to the guy, or I suppose the woman, in the stall next to you. Even if you're buddies, even if you've walked in at the same time and you've both gone into a stall, don't sit there and talk to each other. Do your job, get out. Got it? If you start talking to me, you ain't getting a response. Number 2, brushing your teeth. Ugh. Enough said. Number 3, taking your shoes off. Why would you take your shoes off? I don't care whether you have socks on or not. Why would you take your shoes off in a public or office bathroom? You get the idea that perhaps we're very near the end of civilization. Number 4, flossing. Who flosses in a public restroom? The last 3 are absolutely beyond belief for me. Snacking. Now, I got to tell you, if I hear you eating something while you're on the toilet, I'm calling the cops. You need to be in jail. You need to be removed from society. Even though this in itself is a gross breach of office bathroom etiquette, if I hear you unwrapping a candy bar, I'm going to pop over the stall wall, make direct and powerful eye contact with you, and yell no at the top of my head, like you're a bad dog or something. So there's number 4, snacking. Snacking in a bathroom? Oh, Lord. Number 6. Watching videos on your phone with the speakers on for everyone to hear. I'm amazed at the number of men. Women, you probably don't see this because you have those individual stalls that you get to go into. But I am always fascinated at the people that walk up to a urinal and stand there and work their phone while you know what is just hanging out while they're urinating. Seriously? And then you're going to watch a video on your phone? And then the last one is this is where I know that we have now reached peak idiocy. And that's actually talking on your cell phone while you're standing at the urinal. I can recall, I don't know when I first started, I suppose when we went from BlackBerries and we went to smartphones, I noticed occasionally, particularly at Denver International Airport as I would fly in and out, I would see people standing at the urinal talking on their phone. So I would make sure that I would do a double flush just to make sure that the person that they were talking to knew that they were talking to them in the bathroom. I've given up. I have now just completely given up because I think it's just now standard practice that you walk into a bathroom, you're on your phone, you make a one-handed maneuver to flip it out, you urinate while you're still talking, you flush, and you walk out of the bathroom. Oh, good grief. Yes, we're near the end of civilization. You know how everybody's always talking about we need to be more like Sweden. Well, apparently the CEO of Volvo is warning that the company is actually considering moving Volvo headquarters out of Sweden in the near future, partly because of a rise in violent crime. The CEO, some guy whose first name I can't pronounce, last name Samuelson, told a conference that the car maker was losing its appeal to foreign experts and engineers and further explained his concerns during an interview on some Swedish program. He said, "We are building cars, but we cannot solve the other problems. Somebody else must do that," adding that it's becoming more difficult to attract workers because of Sweden's worsening reputation. He said, "It's definitely not helping when people read about shootings in Gothenburg and wonder if they really dare to move to Gothenburg." He says if the situation doesn't improve, the company may even consider leaving Sweden in the near future. Often people believe that decisions like these are taken by senior management or in China, but the fact is, he says, that we will only place our headquarters in a country where things work. At the moment, we are not close to such a discussion, but yes, it is something that might happen in the future. Now, of course, the chief of police in Gothenburg, Eric Nord, denied that there was a problem, and he's accusing the president of Volvo of getting misinformation from social media. He says, as we have previously highlighted, surveys show that migrants are vastly overrepresented in violent crime and rapes in Sweden, but the government stopped gathering official statistics back in 2005. Now, isn't that convenient? You have statistics prior to 2005 that show that migrants are overrepresented in violent crime and statistics, so how do you fix the problem? Well, the problem is one of statistics, so you quit gathering the statistics. Swedish author Bjorn Ranelid recently warned that the level of crime and violence the previously sedate country is experiencing amounts to a small-scale war. Yeah, let's be more like Sweden. You know how I'm always complaining about their, the old mantra that, there's something wrong in society, that's something people don't like, so there ought to be a law. Well, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia introduced a bill last week that would withhold federal funding for the 2026 World Cup, the men's soccer tournament, which we are scheduled to host in 2026. Well, at least I've got early warning to mark it off my calendar. He wants to block federal funding. Now, let's just stop right there. Federal funding for the World Cup for soccer? First, why are we even doing that? That's bad enough. But here's the other part of the story. He wants to withhold federal funding for the 2026 World Cup unless the United States Soccer Federation agrees to pay men and women's soccer teams equally. The proposed legislation comes in the wake of the U.S. women's performance as the 2019 World Cup last week, the victory in Lyon. Manchin said he was inspired to sponsor the legislation after receiving a letter from West Virginia University's women's soccer head coach who asked the senators to support the national women's team in their pursuit of equal pay. Of course, now Joe Manchin is considered to be a moderate Democrat, but a Democrat nonetheless. And so now here again is government intervening, trying to enforce economic laws that otherwise would have a different effect. It's trying to overcome the laws of physics. Let's force men and women's soccer federations to pay equal. Well, how about equal revenues? You're going to force equal revenues? But I can't get my head around the fact that we have federal funding for the 2026 World Cup. Why are we doing that? Oh, this stuff drives me nuts. I imagine a lot of you are thinking that I might want to talk about what the president had to say in regards to the tweets over the weekend where he told the squad, that's Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and the three others, that they ought to go back to the countries that they came from and try to clean up those countries and pretty much call them communists. And that's exploded into this whole thing about whether the tweets were racist or not. And I don't want to comment on it yet because, well, I'll be quite honest. One, I went through and I read the tweets. I keep searching for the tweets, trying to find what I think is racist or could be construed as racist, and I really haven't found anything yet. So I'm not ready to comment on it. But I do want to comment on just Ilhan Omar and the immigration question in general. So Connor Friedstorff, Nick Gillespie, and the New York Magazine cohort have all kind of been going, and look, Nick Gillespie in particular, I really have a lot of respect for. And I got respect for Tucker Carlson. But they've been going after Tucker Carlson, making some false claims about his positions on immigration. So two of the writers over at The Federalist are defending Tucker Carlson. First is David Harsanyi. He writes, Americans are constantly being lectured that good citizenship is not contingent on skin color, faith, or ethnicity, but a set of beliefs. Yet whenever anyone is critical of the ugly things that someone like Ilhan Omar says, they are immediately battered for being xenophobes and racists. Well, you can't have it both ways, David writes. He continues, I mean, you can try. Nearly the entire contemporary progressive argument is girded by identity grievances. So when Fox News' Tucker Carlson gives a monologue in which he concludes that Ilhan Omar was, quote, living proof that the way we practice immigration has become dangerous to this country, the reaction is predictable. As a philosophical matter, though, Omar isn't the kind of immigrant we should want. That's not because she's Muslim, and it's not because she's black. It's because she does not believe in the traditional ideas that define American life. And she should not be immune from criticism merely because of her background of being a Muslim or a black. Harsanyi is exactly right. This is one reason we still give newcomers citizenship tests. We want them to not only comprehend the foundational ideas that created this country, but we actually want them to adopt those foundational ideas. Now, notwithstanding the pathetic self-flagellation we see from historical revisionists like the Irishman Beto O'Rourke, who claims to be Hispanic, or Omar, I think most immigrants surely understand that, the good things this country has done outweighs our sins, and then some. I think otherwise they wouldn't be here. They come here because they know the absolute incredible opportunity that this country provides them. But where Carlson has a point is in his assertion that no country can import large numbers of people who hate it and expect to survive. That's true of both immigrants and the native born. And I think Tucker Carlson has also noted recently that no country can be governed by people who hate it, like the crowded field of Democrat candidates that are scrambling to denounce America at every opportunity they can find. You cannot survive as a country when the people who want to lead this country focus on nothing but the sins of this country. Sins that have long since been repented, sins which have long since been overcome. So the question is whether we're doing enough to ensure that both immigrants and the native born don't end up hating America the way that Ilhan Omar does, who has every reason not to hate America. But she does. She's obviously anti-Semitic. She's anti-American. Trump has called her a communist. She may or may not be a communist. I know she's a socialist, so she's on the road to communism. But the reason that we don't do a very good job of making certain that we instill traditional American values, not only in the rugrats that we send to public education, but in the people that we allow to come here legally and to become citizens in a legal way, is we don't do a very good job of creating Americans from the native-born population. When we don't even instill good traditional American values in public education, how can we expect a woman from Somalia whose background as a Muslim is anti-Semitic, anti-American, constantly saying things anti-American, how can we expect even our own citizens to look around and go, yeah, well, we're failing. We are failing to educate Americans about why this country is great. Do you ever stop and wonder? Now, I know that some people come here because they truly do want to fundamentally transform this country. I understand that. But have we ever stopped and thought, but what kind of generation are we raising? It goes back to, at the very beginning of this podcast, that pathetic bald-headed woman who's screaming at the guy wearing the MAGA hat about how we need to focus on feelings and quit worrying about facts. That woman, I'm going to make an assumption here, is a product of public education. Now, she may just be inherently stupid. I don't know. But if we're raising a generation that doesn't understand the very foundation of this country, the country won't survive. And that's just a matter of fact. So when Tucker Carlson gets excoriated for saying we can't bring in a generation of immigrants and we can't raise a generation of native-born Americans who inherently hate this country and expect the country to survive, That is not a racist statement. That is a statement of fact. That is a statement that says if you do not have a generation, or you lose an entire generation of informed citizens who understand why and how this republic operates, you are doomed to lose the republic. And thus, when Dr. Franklin was asked by that lady outside Independence Hall, "So, Dr. Franklin, what have you given us?" And he anecdotally responds, "A republic if you can keep it." Tucker Carlson is right. We're going to lose the republic if we don't come to the realization that we have to educate people about American values and why those values are worth preserving. In a bizarre stunt last week, an elf costume real estate developer actually threw money at residents of a homeless camp in California in an effort to entice them to leave. This guy's name is Gene Gorlick, and he shouted from a boom lift as he dropped dollar bills on the encampment, according to San Francisco Gate. He was also reportedly offering $2,000 to anybody who agreed to leave. But not one resident, none of the people that were living in cars, RVs, or tents accepted his offer. In fact, some could be heard yelling in a video that was posted on Twitter, "F you, Gene." So even when you offer them money to leave, they don't want to go. I don't understand all of the psychosis, the psychology. I don't understand all of the medical conditions or the mental conditions. I don't understand a lot about homelessness. But what I do understand is many people see it as a choice. And if you're offered $2,000 to leave a homeless camp near somebody's housing development and you refuse $2,000 to do so, that pretty much tells me all I need to know. By the way, Gene, $2,000, I'll stay away from your housing development. So there was some interesting climate news held in the United States Congress. Now, you got to remember, they're trying to cram in as many hearings as they can because I think either it may be next week or the week after they go on a 6-week vacation. 6 weeks. It's the traditional Labor Day. Yeah, I know it's only July, but it's the Labor Day vacation. Well, Congressman Mo Brooks, who is a Republican from Alabama, blasted a huge hole in the climate change narrative by asking the right questions for the first time. 20,000 years ago, the Earth started to change. So he asks this panel of climate scientists, could humans have caused this?
Not familiar with the Earth's last glacial maximum, roughly 20,000 years ago? Okay, everybody is? Good. For those in the audience who are not, by way of background, during the last glacial maximum, Northern Europe was under ice, roughly 90% of Canada and almost all the continental United States of America, north of Missouri and the Ohio rivers and east of New York City, under ice. According to the United States Geological Survey, during the last glacial maximum, again 20,000 years ago, sea levels were roughly 410 feet lower than today. Stated differently, for 20,000 years, sea levels have risen, on average, 2 feet per century, versus the much less, roughly 1 foot per century rising rate since 1993 that is reflected in Dr. Alley's written testimony. Finally, per Zurich University of Applied Science, Earth's average temperature 20,000 years ago was 48 degrees Fahrenheit versus 59 degrees Fahrenheit today. That's an 11-degree increase in global temperature average over the last 20,000 year period. So my question to each of you is, and we'll start over here with Dr. Pfeffer and move from my right to left, did human beings cause the global warming that started 20,000 years ago and continues through today? Or if not, what did?
So the examples from 20,000 years ago that Mr. Brooks gave us they're excellent examples of the kind of natural variability that the Earth experiences. And there's no question that in the past there have been changes in temperature, in sea level rise, in weather patterns, and climate generally, as dramatic or more dramatic than what we may be experiencing in the future. And of course, they weren't human-caused 20,000 years ago or in the last million years. All of these variable events have been occurring throughout the Earth's modern history.
Well, my first question was, in your judgment, did human beings cause the global warming that began 20,000 years ago during the last glacial maximum?
No, absolutely not.
No, absolutely not. Now, that wasn't the only part. He asked two more climate scientists if humans started the climate change 20,000 years ago. Now, one clearly says no. The other, Dr. Moon, tries to say that it sped up over the past 100 years, but sea levels have leveled off. She has no answer. Nobody wants to show that video. Nobody wants to show that video. So he asked another climate scientist if humans caused global warming that started 20,000 years ago. And, of course, that scientist also asks or says no. So in closing, clearly something that has been going on the past 19,800 years happened without our help. Stop this nonsense. Stop it. Every once in a while, a member of Congress puts somebody on the spot, and they have a choice, but they're under oath, and they know everybody's watching, and they tell the truth.
Out of curiosity, why do you, or how do you explain that the sea level rise average over the last 20,000 years has been 2 feet per century, yet we're down to 1 foot per century?
So much of our rise in sea levels that you're talking about came earlier in that 20,000 years. Over this last 10,000 years, we've been sitting with very stable sea levels, and those stable sea levels have allowed us to develop the coast of the world.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Moon. And I only have about 30 seconds left for Dr. Bell. Dr. Bell, in your judgment, 20,000 years ago, global warming, when it began, was that caused by humans?
In my judgment, the variation that we were seeing 20,000 years ago was part of the pulse of the planet. It pulses at 100,000 years, glacial, interglacial. When I started graduate school, we were expecting to go into the next glacial period, except that we as human beings in the last 100 years, and you can see the pickup, since we invented the steam engine, you can see the temperature moving up.
All right. I'm out of time, Madam Chairman. I appreciate your indulgence. I just wish I had sufficient time to actually get into what the cause of the global warming that began 20,000 years ago was, if not humans.
And interestingly, that last person, in a roundabout way, was saying that she says she's trying to imply that humans must have something to do with it, although she provides no causal link whatsoever. Do you think any of this appeared anywhere in the mainstream media? Of course that it didn't, because it doesn't fit the narrative. But let's just forget for a minute. Let's just say that these particular scientists on this panel were all just nut jobs. Doesn't it show that there is not a consensus? No consensus. And in fact, if you go back and listen closely to what they had to say, it's the natural variation in what the Earth does. End of story. I don't know what's going on at O'Hare International Airport, but officials say that U.S. Customs and Border Protection agents at O'Hare thwarted a man's attempt to import dozens of pounds of African rat meat. I wish I had an African rat meat joke here, but maybe I can find one in a minute. Customs spokesman Steve Bonsbach said Tuesday that the man declared the 32 pounds of meat back on June 26 when his flight arrived from the Ivory Coast. The meat was confiscated and destroyed. The CBP says the man does not face a fine. He continued on his journey because he was forthcoming about what he was bringing into the country. He says customs officials prohibit the entry of African meats to prevent the spread of Ebola virus and other infectious contagious diseases. So if he's bringing in rat meat to eat, how much rat meat has he already eaten? And does the man have Ebola virus? And how will we know because they released him from the airport in Chicago? Now, the Ebola virus takes, I think, up to 21 days to show up. Chicago has been issued an Ebola alert, take caution to avoid all public transport and blah, blah, blah. But why did they let the guy go? You've got rat meat. Now, I assume that they tested the rat meat, but it's rats. It came from a country that's known for Ebola, and you just let the guy go? I don't get it. Rat meat.
I ate at Taco Bell a lot. I felt like we had an understanding. They were like, "Hey, are you kind of broke? Well, we kind of have food, so bring it on by." But I recently had to part ways with Taco Bell because I ordered a taco at Taco Bell, and the guy behind the counter looks at me and says, "I'm sorry, but we can't make tacos right now because we just started having a problem with the meat hose." I'm glad you're with me because he kept his fingers on the buttons like I was just going to brush that off and be like, "Well, what hoses are working?" Just started having a problem with the meat hose, you say? Well, is your problem with the meat hose that you found out there's a meat hose? Because I just started having a problem with it too. Don't you mean we're closed? Don't you mean I'm never eating here again? Don't you mean I now have diarrhea from words? Oh, man. So many questions I don't even want answered. Like, is there a meat hydrant? Have you ever thumbed it to get more pressure? And I got no beef with this guy. I've got no issue with this guy personally. He just looked at me and said meat hose without batting an eye. He's obviously seen things. He's been in the heart of battle, and I respect that. But saying we just started having a problem with the meat hose would not be an acceptable explanation for the lack of meat if we were on a space shuttle. That's not thinking outside the bun. That's thinking outside of Leviticus. It's a long joke, but he said meat hose. I can't think of anything I needed to hear less after ordering a taco from Taco Bell than meat hose.
Okay, so it's not rat meat, but a meat hose? Close enough. I actually thought I was in the Twilight Zone when I heard this speech that Joe Biden gave in Des Moines at an AARP-sponsored Des Moines Registered event where he talked to, well, just see if this doesn't sound familiar to you. Remember, Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States under Barack Hussein Obama during those 8 years. Remember the famous, if you like...
How many of you have, when you were working, liked your, and you may still be working, many of you, how many of you like your employer-based health care? Did you think it was adequate? Now, if I come along and say, finish, you can't have it anymore. Well, that's what Medicare for All does. You cannot have it, period. Number one. There's a hiatus spot in between, by the way, how long it's going to take. So I give people the option. If you like your health care plan, your employer-based plan, you can keep it. If, in fact, you have private insurance, you can keep it.
Oh, wait a minute. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health insurance, you can keep your health insurance. You see, there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesiastes, there's just nothing new. What goes around comes around. It's nothing new. It's all the same. Joe Biden repeats the Obamacare lie while describing his own health care plan in an attempt to differentiate himself and to move himself away from the far lefties, somehow over to the moderate middle by repeating the lies from his own administration. Yeah, if you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health insurance, you can keep your health insurance. Man, oh man, this is going to be a wild presidential. I just can't wait. So Uncle Joe sent me a story about the New Zealand gun buyback program. I always like the phrase buyback because the government's not actually, unless the government sold you the gun can't buy back the gun because, well, they're not the original seller. If somebody wants to buy back my guns, it has to be the person that sold the gun to me. Well, here's what Joe wrote. This past Saturday, New Zealand officials ran the first of 250 scheduled gun buyback events in that country's second largest city, Wellington. The program is part of that country's new gun law that was enacted following that country's Christchurch mass shooting in March of this year. The population of Wellington is 490,000 people, and that represents 10% of New Zealand's total population of 4.8 million people. Under this law, it made the ownership or possession of, quote, assault-style rifles and high-capacity magazines illegal. Now, I should look it up and see what their definition of an assault-style rifle is, because every rifle that I own, even my shotguns, are assault-style. The law also authorized the government to spend up to 200 million New Zealand dollars, that's about 134 million US dollars, to buy back those now banned guns and magazines. Now, the estimated number of guns that must be turned in under that new law is 14,000. Keep that number in mind. That's the estimated number of guns that must be turned in under their gun buyback law, 14,000. Now, before we get to how that first large-scale buyback even turned out, it should be noted that back in March, as soon as word of this proposed legislation became public, New Zealanders flocked to gun stores to buy more guns before the proposed law could be enacted. Of course they did. That's why whenever you have gun grabbers, gun sales go up. Now, how many people showed up to turn in their guns in the country's second largest city? What was the population? Almost 500,000. 490,000 people. 10% of the country's total population of 4.8 million, or thereabouts. How many people showed up and said, yeah, I want to comply. Here are my guns. Where's my check? 169. Out of 500,000 people, 169 people showed up. Now, how much of that allocated $200 million, New Zealand dollars, was paid to those 169 gun owners? 430,000 New Zealand dollars. 0.2% of the allocated amount. And if each of those gun owners turned in one of the banned guns, and not just a banned high-capacity magazine, what percentage of the estimated 14,000 newly banned guns were turned in? 1.1%. 169 out of 14,000. So if 10% of that country's population turned in just 1.1% of the newly banned guns, then extrapolation of that compliance rate would predict that nationwide only 11% of the 14,000 targeted weapons are going to be turned in as mandated by the new law. That's not going to come even close to what the politicians promised it was going to do. Now, that also assumes that compliance rates in the more rural parts of the country would be at least as high as it was in the city of Wellington. Gun buyback programs continuing to fail everywhere you turn. It also shows for all of those people in this country who believe that the way to solve the gun crime problem, which, look, every single murder, whether it's, a murder of passion, somebody that knows somebody else, or it's a random act of violence, every one of those is a tragedy. I get that. But let's be realistic. We don't have a gun crime problem in this country. But setting that aside for a moment, every time a politician says that we need more common sense gun safety legislation, or whatever trite phrase they use, or they suggest an assault weapons ban, or they suggest some sort of gun buyback program, what do you think the compliance rate in the United States would be? If the compliance rate in New Zealand is that 1.1%, what do you think it's going to be in the United States, where we have a culture and a history, and we have, first of all, they got to get past the Second Amendment, which they're not going to do. But what do you think the compliance rate among Americans? I just think about my neighborhood. I bet the compliance rate in my neighborhood, well, first of all, the one liberal that I know that lives fairly close to me probably doesn't even own a gun. But the other people in my neighborhood that own guns, I think the compliance rate would be a big fat goose egg. Total dumbassery. Speaking of guns, let's get some taxpayer relief shots in. The first one comes to us from Allegheny County.
New details about an officer-involved shooting. It started when police discovered a 30-year-old man shot to death in a car in Penn Hills.
Witnesses say a man and a teenager ran from the scene. Tonight, police say those two were involved in that man's death.
Rachel Monjovi is live now with breaking details. Rachel.
Well, tonight, that teenager is facing homicide charges. The other man was killed after police say he opened fire on a Penn Hills police officer. But I want to take you back to when this all unfolded. Police tell us they found a 30-year-old man, Joshua Lopez, dead inside his car last night at the Sharon Court apartment complex in Penn Hills. We're told he died after being shot in the head. Now, witnesses told police they saw two people leaving that scene, heading towards a house on Frankstown Road. A woman at that home told police that there were 4 young men inside her house. She was able to get 3 of them to come outside, but detectives say 20-year-old Anaje Dickinson hid in the basement. Investigators say when they tried getting Dickinson to come outside, things took a turn.
Instead of complying with the directions, the subject emerged, began firing at the officer and charging the officer. The officer returned fire, striking the individual at least twice.
Now, police say Dickinson died shortly after. 15-year-old Mizal Ford is facing homicide charges tonight. Among others, he is being held in the Allegheny County Jail tonight. We do know that he will be charged as an adult. Reporting live, Rachel Mon.
You know what amazes me? You know the cops are out there. Is this suicide by cop? Is this just, you know it's over. So you're making this choice in your head. I'm either going to go spend the rest of my life in jail after I'm convicted of murder charges and everything, all the other charges. So do I do that and continue on my life inside a prison, or do I just go out with the guns a-blazing and let the cops kill me and just end it right here? Don't you? I'm actually morbidly fascinated by what goes through the minds of thugs when they know they're surrounded by cops, all of whom are armed, all of whom have their guns trained, ready to fire, ready to defend themselves, and you come out shooting. What do you think's going to happen? I don't get it. The next one comes to us from Hollywood, Florida. Goes like this.
A van riddled with bullets. Surveillance cameras captured the man who police say shot at an innocent driver. Officers say when they responded to the scene and were faced with the suspect, they were forced to shoot and kill him.
And now they're trying to figure out what happened in the moments before the van was shot up. CBS 4's Riel Creighton is live near the scene in Hollywood with the very latest. Riel?
Well, what police have told us so far is that contrary to some other reports, the person who was shot and killed was not a child, but they've told us very little else. What we know is that there was a car shot at, perhaps randomly. Police say they located a suspect, shots were fired, and that person is dead. Surveillance video shows what police say led up to the deadly encounter. Late afternoon, watch the man on the screen as a white van passes at the corner of Scott Street and North 70th Terrace. He pulls out a gun and fires. Neighbors out to capture the aftermath.
That's the cab. You can't see it in the shade, but that's the cab right next to the fence.
Police were called to the scene where they say they found a shaken driver, his van with bullet holes and little explanation. He said he was just driving by and didn't know who shot at him or why.
He gave a description of the shooter. Officers searched the area vigorously and did find someone that matched the description approximately 4 blocks from the original call.
At 67th Avenue.
Cops are racing up and down the street.
Police said they located the suspect, shots were fired, he was killed, but told us little else about what happened or why they say officers were forced to fire.
It's too early in the preliminary stages of the investigation to give any more information.
Neighbors had more to say.
We heard bang, 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 like that. And I heard them yelling when I first came out the house. Yeah. They had him on the ground. The one cop said, "Don't get up or I'll have to kill you."
We're still trying to find out more information about where the investigation goes from here. Police have yet to release the identity of the person who was shot and killed. We're live in Hollywood. Riel Creighton, CBS 4 News.
Let me see if I can figure this one out. So a guy is walking down a street. A van drives by. You can see it on the video. He pulls his gun out, extends his arm straight out, fires into the car. The bullets hit the car. So now the cops are called. You have a 911 call that says shots have been fired. There's a guy walking around with a gun, shooting at cars as they go by. It goes on and on. Eventually they find somebody. He's on the ground. They tell him not to get up. He's already fired a gun once. This is what the cops know. They tell him to stay on the ground. He refuses to stay on the ground. He gets up. Now, whether they see the gun or not, to me doesn't make any difference. This guy is known to have been shooting at cars. He gets up. He goes down. I think that's where the investigation goes. Don't call me, I'm not Karnak the Great. I just kind of think that's how it turns out. Yeah. Thanks for listening to this episode of Michael Brown Unplugged. You know the drill. You can follow us on the iHeart app. You can follow us on iTunes. You can still follow us on Spreaker. But I also have a favor to ask. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram, because that helps us spread the podcast out even further. And you can do all of that by simply going to michaelbrowntoday.com. Again, thanks for listening, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.